walking down the street.
I do want to say to Donnie and many of you in this room that over a very long career in this city, all of you have helped me and my colleagues tell the truth and to try to tell.
Get my hat up.
I'm from South Carolina, so I just
May not look like you.
look at Donnie.
What does this event mean to you, Miss Peggy Morris?
Oh, my heart,
Happy 20th anniversary.
my heart is about loving up on my sisters. Do you know what it feels like to have your sisters in the room? Donnie.
Letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, and dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. I am beautiful, I am blessed, but not just what you see in the flesh.
The doctor lived next door to the janitor to the reverend, and the lawyer. We were together. Now we've been so high and mighty that you create stress for your society because you don't like poor black folks either. That's a health problem. Get yourself together so I can stop being taking care of geriatric people and get back to pediatrics. I thank you, Donnie, for all you've done. Let's keep doing it all and more.
I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine through. Dare to be you, dare to be me, dare to be different and unique. I'm gonna be the best me I can be by letting His glory shine.
First name's Donnie, last name's Glover, in it to win it for the long haul, baby. Okay, so we have a very special guest today, and we're going to be talking about, I guess, a heap of things: education, culture, history. Special thank you to Dr. Tyrone Taborn. We had a wonderful event, Black Wall Street DMV, Friday over at the Omni Shoreham in DC. A number of honorees were recognized, including Dr. Taborn and his very powerful wife, Jean Hamilton. A lot of people know about Dr. Taborn, but you really got to know that Jean Hamilton is his secret weapon. And together they produced the Black Engineer of the Year Awards for some 37 years. Next year, it will be coming back to Baltimore. And all of that to say, it kicks off today at the Gaylord in Washington, D.C. Okay, so let's get to our guest. I don't know if you've ever met Phenomenal before, but Tycely Williams, the Chief Development Officer, she's got a number of hats. But among things, this lady has raised over $100 million. Now, I work for the Empowerment Zone, and the federal government gave Baltimore and 5 other cities $100 million. This lady has raised $100 million, and she knows a little bit about history. Without further ado, there you are, Tycely Williams. How are you?
Donnie, I'm great, and I'm so incredibly excited to be with you. What you may not know about this fundraiser / matchmaker, when I moved to this area, I was introduced to your great work because you are an amazing ambassador, not only for Black culture, but for small businesses. And for 7 years, I owned my own fundraising shop. And I've been so incredibly grateful for the platform that you have created. And time again, you create space for those of us who are often overlooked and unappreciated. So thank you for using your gifts and talents to not only raise money, but to also increase the spirits of people and to provide inspiration. So it's just a joy to have this conversation with you today. Thanks for inviting me.
Now, Tycely, you got thick enough skin so I can ask you tough questions, right?
Yes, Donna, you've got permission to just settle on into whatever is at the heart of the matter. So let's get into it.
Okay, so in doing some research about you, I understand that you are a music historian.
Oh, Donna, you might be talking about some of my pastime, but come on, let me see which street you're turning on here.
Okay, here's the pop quiz. You got to finish the line. Are you ready? There ain't no way
Donnie, I tell you,
There ain't no way that I can. No,
you're starting the morning early.
it's the anthem.
It is more than the anthem. I think for all of us who celebrate Black history, not only in February, but live it all throughout 365 days of the year, we know a little something about what gets us up and out and on the dance floor. And Donnie, I think you might be referencing one of my favorite songs.
I want to know how come Frankie Beverly and Mays have not won one of those big time awards. What is wrong with America? Where you're from here in Baltimore and everywhere I've ever been in Black America.
Yes.
We love Frankie Beverly and Mays. Mays featuring Frankie Beverly. Who was it that discovered them? Marvin Gaye?
You know, Donnie, that is a good question. I need to fact check myself on that.
I'm gonna go out on a limb. I think it was Marvin.
Was it Marvin Gaye? Which would be
yeah, but nonetheless, why did they never get honored and recognized? I mean, they never got their props. Never.
You know, Donnie, I think you and I have journeyed through life long enough to know the answer to this. I spoke at the beginning about the level of appreciation I have for you, because you have not only centered, you have celebrated others. And what often happens, you know, we just rolled out of the Grammys, and the Grammys, I mean, it was amazing. It was great. I am a big fan of Beyonce, and I was really ecstatic to see her make history. At the same time, I recognize that what often consumes our attention as viewers, it's been created by white producers, those individuals who are giving consideration to who even will be considered for an award, the selection committee, right? When you give thought to what we applaud, what we praise here in America, oftentimes it's tied to the interest, and the power usually rests with white people. And so I've got a lot of white friends, and we share a lot of musical interest in common, but not a lot of white people know anything about Frankie Beverly and Mays. And so I think, Donnie, a lot of it has to do with some groups, some norms we have kept within our culture, and we celebrate, we recognize the genius. But I think a lot of the reason why there may not have been crossover appeal in their natural setting is because there wasn't adequate appreciation.
Okay. So coming from Birmingham, we're big on Black Wall Street around here. We're big on celebrating Black businesses. We celebrate Black entrepreneurs and professionals, as well as the people who support them regardless of race. If I'm not mistaken, in every area, although we know about Tulsa, we know about Maggie Walker down in Richmond Ward, Jackson Ward in Richmond, we know about Durham's Black Wall Street. Not many people in this area ever talk about A.G. Gaston.
Yes.
Was he from Birmingham?
Yes. So, you know, Dr. Gaston is somebody, when you talk about the individuals who shape and form communities, you're often looking at leaders within the business community, because those individuals not only create jobs, they often are the start to what is Black philanthropy, which is something I spend a lot of time fostering and starting and sustaining. But when you look back on Dr. Gaston and the work that he created, you know, very few opportunities existed for Black people to step into white-owned businesses. Because, Donnie, let's talk about legislation. It was illegal for Black people to go into businesses owned by white people. And many of our Black entrepreneurs, including A.G. Gaston, did a phenomenal job creating products and services that we desperately needed within the Black community to not only sustain ourselves, but to also just provide general protection for our families, for our wealth. And so while his wealth was accumulated largely tied to insurance, he also was a wonderful individual who had an array of businesses in downtown Birmingham, everything from hotel accommodations to also small businesses. And it was my understanding in connecting with a lot of individuals who started their businesses in the 50s and 60s, that he was just an integral part of providing financial capital. You know, when Black people couldn't step into traditional banks to get loans, he was actually there to see their promise and potential to be what we call now an angel investor, which is someone who might not be known on Front Street as the man or woman behind the financial resources needed, but often plays a pivotal role in ensuring that the small business has what it needs to kick off the operation. So he is definitely a giant. His legacy lives on. And, you know, Donnie, there's something that has just been centered in my spirit as we talk about Black History Month. And that's one of my favorite African proverbs. And it talks about that one's name remains above the grave. And so long after we have lived, when we live lives like the exemplary life that you have lived, my friend, our works extend beyond the termination of our lives. And when you think about people like A.G. Gaston, when you think about people like Anthony Bowen, and when you think about people like Sojourner Truth, and right here where I am, I'm thinking about Dorothy Height, because I'm not very far from several organizations where she had prominent leadership roles. And so these conversations, Donnie, that you have week over week, they're not just about looking in the rearview mirror to promote our past. It is about finding inspiration so it can fertilize the talents within us to push and press forward so that we are creating our own legacies, right? So that we are leaving a mark, whether it's in Baltimore, whether it's in DC, whether it's in my hometown of Birmingham. There are people behind all these institutions that are driving positive change. And so I just am excited to continue this conversation so we can continue to speak to some of the names whose legacies remain above the grave, and names that have had a profound impact within the Black community and across America.
My brother introduced me to James Brown.
Yes.
He would pull out many albums over the years, and he would show me the lyrics. And one day, he was playing James Brown, and I said, "Andre, where are the lyrics?" He said, "Lyrics?" James don't even know what he was saying. So I'm from Baltimore, and there was a certain prejudice I had when I went to Atlanta. When my introduction to college at Morehouse.
Okay.
And we were downtown Atlanta on Peachtree, and the lady said to the little girl, and I'm paraphrasing it, "Down, down, 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 down." And the little girl said, "Down, down, down, down." And they were conversing. And and my friend, my boy and I, we looked at each other. Did you hear what that? And so I am reminded of the Geechee, of the Gullah off the coast of Georgia, a history that very few of us know about. And there's the 1619 Project.
Yes.
And I think it's so wrong. In Unapologetically Black, in my latest book, I Am Black Wall Street, my mentor says I don't mention it enough. But we talk about the Gullah Islands, and the first people that went there, according to my book, were enslaved by a Spaniard. Typically, we know about the British and their role in enslavement. I'm going somewhere with this, but we know very little about the Spanish and their influence on Florida. Florida was owned by Spain until 1831. And so what I'm getting to is, you say you from Birmingham.
Yes. Yes.
I want to know, do you sound local? You have any local accent? Because I'm hearing, pretty polished.
Donnie, you are hilarious. So you want to talk a little bit about dialect. And to your point about going somewhere, I'm trying to think of the best place to begin with this story. So you talked about Geechee and Gullah, and my mother's family, so my maternal family, they're actually from Charleston, South Carolina. And so they were brought to this country, like 40% of slaves, through the ports of Charleston. And so when I am back in Ellery, South Carolina, which is about 72 miles west of Charleston, my dialect shifts. I speak in a higher octave. There are words or letters within sentences that may not adequately be pronounced in accordance with the Queen's English, but in ways in which we can understand and communicate with each other. And, Donnie, it's interesting because I have a niece who often sees me code switch into situations and circumstances, and she may say something like, "Auntie, speak like that." And where I always sit, Donnie, in who I am and how I operate and the level of authenticity I bring to my relationships, it is not an exhibition to shift into speaking like that. When I am home and when I am with my family, I speak in ways that my family understands. When I step into white dominant culture leading fundraising for the Bipartisan Policy Center, I communicate in ways that my audience understands. And so there's lots of versatility in the ways in which I communicate. And it depends upon where you catch me and where you find me and how I sound. And the unfortunate thing about how we've had to position ourselves to be successful is that so much of the beauty that's tied and connected to who we are in places and spaces that other people may not have exposure to, other people don't often bear witness to that because they bear witness to who we have to be through this perceived sense of being successful. So, Donnie, I say all that to say, to warmly welcome you down to South Carolina and to just find your way over to the front porch. And you might have a different impression on the way I sound and the way I show up, because when I'm home, I bring a different dimension of myself and a dimension that I don't necessarily feel comfortable bringing in all the places and spaces that I occupy.
Got you. So speaking of that, speaking of home, speaking of how you grew up, tell me about your dad.
So a little bit about Dad. My dad was a great man, and similar to lots of our ancestors, he was the first person in his family to go to college. So Dad grew up, he was one of those kids who actually left school in middle school to go downtown Birmingham during the civil rights movement to march and to protest. And so Dad was actually someone who earned a scholarship, landed at South Carolina State. And as a result of his athletic talent and his love for his community, he moved back to Birmingham, became active and involved as an educator and a principal, and continued to influence the lives of young people for over 50 decades. So he is one of my heroes who now rests with the Lord, but is a wonderful example to me on the importance in empowering and instilling confidence and courage and tenacity in young people.
You know, Tycely, I grew up, it wasn't until I was, I think, in my 40s that I realized I was one of the only kids on the block.
Yes.
To have my dad in the house.
Yes.
We haven't gotten to this, but I can only imagine that saving the Black family is imperative to you and your mission. Tell me about the role of Black fathers today.
Black fathers, their role is equally as important today as it always has been. You know, I spend a lot of time in my day job studying what it means to be a leader. And fundamentally, Donnie, I think a leader is someone who is capable of creating pathways for others to follow. And a Black father is a leader, not only within the construct of a Black family, but also in the construct of the Black community. To me, Black fathers are significantly important at this moment in time when we feel as if our humanity is at question, when there are so many people professing that they don't feel safe, that a Black father is the manifestation of strength. A Black father is the manifestation of intellect. A Black father is also the manifestation of kindness and compassion. And what I love about Black fathers is that they demonstrate that two things can coexist, that you can be strong and intelligent, and you can also be caring and compassionate. You see, the world has a way of placing judgmental labels on people where you are less than, or you are this, or you are that. But what is great, Donnie, about Black fathers is that they blend both what is perceived to be a strength and a weakness. They bring the physical might, the muscles, the fortitude, the tenacity, all tied to what is good about being strong. And they also bring a wonderful manifestation of what is often tied as being weak: sensibilities, tolerance, patience. And Black men have a wonderful way in standing in their strength in ways that model excellence, not only for the people in the family that have formed a sense of trust and admiration as a result of not only how they live, but how they grind it out day in and day out, making a way out of no way. You opened your show speaking to a Black man who wasn't only considerate about his own success, but had compassion for his wife, the other people in his family. You know, Black men are at the center of who we are, of how we show up. And Black men have understood generation over generation the importance of legacy building and the importance of safety and security. And for that, I applaud, which I think is probably, as we talk about those individuals who are underappreciated and often underestimated, it is certainly the Black man in America.
Now, you have a son?
I do not have any biological children, Donnie, and there was a time in my life when that question would be posed, and it left me with the feeling of uncertainty around my own worth. But what I've come to realize as a result of the life that I live and the calling on my life, as a result of not having any biological children of my own, I see every child as mine.
Well, I saw something that said you're one and only. Was it a niece?
It was probably my nephew.
Okay.
So I have one nephew, I have several nieces, and to the point that I made earlier about the increased level of responsibility that rests within Black men, as his aunt, I have an expectation that's attached to Nathan Allen Pickens that is very different than the expectation that I have attached to other young people I encounter.
What's that expectation? What's
My
that level?
expectation of my nephew is that he will continue to be what the men in our family have always been. So when I talked about the characteristics that I'm drawn to about Black men, I'm speaking about those characteristics, Donnie, because I've seen them manifested in my father, in my grandfathers, in my uncles. I'm not really concerned about what the social science has to say about how Black men show up in America, because I know how Black men show up in America. I know what draws other people to be partnered with Black men to live healthy, loving, amazing, fulfilled lives because of how Black men show up. So it's important to me that I instill a few fundamental things within my nephew. One of which ties to the point that I've been making around the concept of safety. It is important for people to feel safe and secure in your presence. And in order for people to feel safe with you, you must be able to establish trust, which means when you say you're going to do something, I have an expectation that at 5 years old that my nephew is following up and following through. If he's going on a field trip and he says, Auntie, I'm going to tell you what I learned, it is my expectation that my nephew is going to take the initiative to FaceTime me. I don't need to circle back to say, Nathan, you told me you were going to do this. I have an expectation of a 5-year-old that you gave me your word, and that you need to learn that in order to be trusted and in order to create and sustain spaces of safety, you must learn the importance of following up and following through. So, Donnie, that's number one. You've got to know the importance of creating trusting relationships. And that's how I've been able to secure hundreds of millions of dollars because of trust. The second piece is it is important to me that my nephew understands the significance of activating courage. We talk a lot about the giants. You spotlight a lot of people right here on your morning show. And what is the common denominator, no matter what they've done, no matter where they've achieved success, is that they had to activate courage. You cannot sit in America in a place of fear. Now, I expect my nephew, myself, and everybody else to activate courage, to sometimes not obtain what you thought you would obtain. I expect you to learn from that, fail forward, and I expect you to continue to activate your courage with each opportunity that rests within your door.
Did you say fail forward?
Fail forward, Donnie. Absolutely.
What is that? Never heard of that.
So, Donnie, fail forward is a notion that when things do not go according to plan, all has not been lost if you have taken an insight, a lesson, a learning, so that when you are either repeating something similar or merely navigating through the complexities of life, you can draw back to that wisdom and you can actually pull from that to set yourself and others up for success. Because here's the great thing about relationships, Donnie, and I know you know this. When you create trust with people, when you can activate courage, individuals begin looking to you as a leader. They follow you. And sometimes as the leader, you got to be honest with people and saying like, hey, I don't have all the answers. I'm going to try this. We may make it, we may not. But it's like I tell my nephew, at the age of 5, when you're out there playing soccer, You may have an understanding of the play. Your coach is giving you a sense of what to do, but you get out there, you might have to activate courage to go another way. And if your
Wait.
teammates are following you, right, Donnie, they can adapt to what wasn't the play of the coach, but was the instinct of the leader on the field to move in a certain way.
Hold up. Does Nathan allow you to come to his games? It sounds like you're one of those tenacious aunties.
I am. I absolutely am. I will say that there is a different level of, my nephew feels differently when his aunt is watching anything he is doing.
Really?
Versus his parents. Absolutely. Because, Auntie has conversations that are very different than the conversations his parents have with him, because his parents have been charged with the daily care and feeding, making sure his belly's full and making sure he's joyful and transporting him from here to there. And Auntie is concerned with building a man who is going to be respected and responsible and someone who is going to be righteous. So everything with Auntie is a teachable moment.
So his first love will be vetted by you.
His first love will be vetted by me, and his first love must carry values that matter not only to his auntie, but that matter to our family.
What are those values?
I talk a lot about the importance of respect, because I come from a family, my maternal and paternal ancestors, who demanded respect as it pertained to how they showed up in the world. So they were involved in the civil rights movement, with women's suffrage, with elements of equity, because it was important to them to feel respected. And because respect was something that mattered to them, they did a fantastic job, Donnie, respecting others with the rightful expectation that they too would be respected. So at the core of the values is just fair and humane treatment of others. Nathan is not going to bring someone home who is going to be disrespectful and not be able to be kind to their neighbor. That's not going to work for Auntie. Now, I recognize that everybody hasn't been introduced to the same value set. So I'm not closed-minded, Donnie. I recognize that maybe someone comes to dinner who might not quite exhibit or actualize the values because maybe they haven't had the exposure, right? So I'm not discounting someone who immediately may not show up in a way that's value aligned, but I am underscoring to my nephew and to myself the importance of articulating what matters and having an expectation that the people you connect and commune with are also able to get down with those values.
Little Nathan's gonna be ducking you out when he break, like, no, you can't meet her. Let's go over here. Okay, so gender switch here. Daughters. I have a daughter whose birthday is coming up at the end of this month. She shares a birthday with one of my favorite writers of all time, William Edward Burghardt Du Bois. Any advice?
Love it.
In raising daughters in today's world, in a world where the Beehive has as much influence as the Democratic Party, it seems.
That's right. You know, Donnie, I want to go back to where we started. You know, I kind of centered an African proverb that really resonates with me as it pertains to legacy building, right? One's name remains above the grave. As I impart lessons from many attempts of failing forward, I would ask you as a father to consider another African proverb that I hold near and dear to my heart, and that is reminding your daughter that a good name is better than wealth. A good name is better than wealth. So when you
That
talk
is
about,
that Proverbs
that's an African proverb, a good
or
name
African
is better than
proverb?
wealth. African proverb. And when you look at what social media is, it's all about the name. It's all about the brand. It's all about who someone is perceived to be and the curiosity around the name. And so I would ask you in conversations with your daughter to ask, what's in your name? What are you building in your personal brand? You're on social media. People are following you. They're liking your post. They're retweeting. There's something about your name, your image, your brand that is drawing people to you. But you want to impress upon your daughter to do what I have done with my father. My father had a name associated with goodness. Donnie Glover is a name associated with goodness. Your daughter is likely emulating what you have established, which is she is a part of a lineage and a family that recognizes that names can be good or bad. And you have created an example when someone mentions your name, the feeling, the reputation, the expectation, it's tied to goodness. And so I just want to applaud what you're already doing, Donnie, because as you continue to impart wisdom and to reinforce it, what you essentially want to underscore is a name brings value. And your name is associated with something in these streets.
You mentioned South Carolina and some of your roots. I have a grandfather who's from Orangeburg, South Carolina.
I know a lot about Orangeburg, South Carolina.
I've never heard of Cleveland until last year when the CIAA came to Baltimore. It's coming back in a few days. But there was someone else. There's a city in South Carolina called Charleston. And there was a freedom fighter that I learned about in undergrad in the McNair program. Dr. Eugenia Collier introduced me to this phenomenal story of Denmark Vesey. And I later learned that they built the Citadel in Orangeburg or in South Carolina because of Denmark Vesey and the fear that he brought to the table. But he hit the number. I believe the year was 1799. He bought his freedom, and they told him to go back to Africa, and he said, hell no. He wanted everybody to be free. So
that's right.
Any thoughts on, because being from Baltimore, sadly, unfortunately, we know, and I guess maybe it's across America, we know very little about our history as a people. You come from Birmingham. What's it like coming from there to here, to Washington, D.C.?
I'm going to speak on what it's like. And I'm going to also do a quick rewind because you introduced Denmark Vesey. And I just kind of want to punctuate a few things here so that people are connecting some dots. You started talking about the influence of the islands when you talked about Geechee and Gullah culture. And Denmark is a wonderful example of someone who was actually born in slavery in St. Thomas. And he was enslaved in Bermuda sometime before being brought to Charleston, right? So this is someone who had an awareness of what it was like to be in one land and to be brought against his will to another land. And a wonderful manifestation of all of the things that I was speaking to about what it means to be a Black man in a family leading and in a community leading. He actually purchased his freedom, and I want to say it was his early 30s. Okay, so this is someone who was not only enslaved, but had the tenacity, the strength, the activation of courage to know that there is a pathway by which I can be delivered, and I am going to do what it takes to purchase my freedom. So he purchases his freedom, and then he links into a religious construct and structure. So when you talk about success in the Black community, you can't really speak on it without talking about the Black church. So when you talk about Charleston and Denmark and his legacy, he was actually instrumental in founding an independent African Methodist Episcopal church. My grandmother would insist that I not use AME. Okay, it was just an absolute cardinal sin to use the term AME. So I got to make sure, Donnie, that I'm saying African Methodist Episcopal Church. But he was actually involved in founding the congregation of what the city now calls and knows as Mother Emanuel. Now, Mother Emanuel is something that all of us, Black, white, we have a reference point for the horrific tragedy that occurred at that church. I am closely connected to that church because my great-grandfather was the presiding elder of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and of that district. And so when you talk about who I am and how I show up and what has influenced me, my ancestors didn't have social media. I can't go back to see what they were talking about or what had been archived or what had been saved, but we have oral history. And my grandmother, who was 60 years older than me, would often tell me stories about slavery because her grandmother was a slave. And so I say all of this to say, when you talk about places like Charleston, just rich with history, I am super excited. And Donna, I'm extending this invitation to you to come and visit. We've got the opening of the International African American Slavery Museum, which is slated to take place in June of this year.
You got pushed back, right? It initially got pushed back.
Got pushed back. It was initially going to open earlier this year. It's pushed. So let's keep our eyes and ears. But Donnie, when it opens, you come on down to Charleston and find your way out to Johns Island, which is where I am. And we'll sit on the porch and keep the conversation going. But back to the question that you raised about Birmingham. When I left to move to Washington, D.C. nearly 20 plus years ago, my parents said to me, we don't know anybody there. They were unsettled with the concept and the idea that their daughter would parachute into a place where they did not feel a sense of security attached to my well-being, where they were not confident in knowing that I could activate social networks that would help lift me to where I wanted to be. You say the great thing about my parents and likely your parents and all of the other individuals that come into our lives is that they teach us what it means to succeed. They too have failed forward and learned some things about life. So the first thing that I will say as it pertains to how it felt like I was wrapped in a lot of uncertainty. I did not have the benefit of Facebook and Instagram and TikTok to be able to see who from my college and university might be here, who I might be able to connect with to say, hey, let me know what your thoughts are around where I can find my first job, or where should I go to church, or where should I hang out to get my, they don't say get your groove on anymore, Donnie, but you get the point, right? I want to listen to a little Frankie Beverly and Mays. Where do I go to do that? So I was uncertain, but it's interesting that what enabled me to activate my courage was not only a belief in myself, but it was a belief in my community. I knew that as a Black person, that even not knowing anybody in the District of Columbia, that I would be accepted, that I would find places and spaces where I belonged, that I would find people like Irvin Reed who would create opportunities for me, because I saw that modeled as a little girl in Birmingham. I saw how business owners were able to not only keep their doors open, but to celebrate 5 years of business, 10 years of business, 15, 100 plus, because they had a consumer base who not only needed a product and service, but they had a consumer base who also bought into their success, who appreciated the way that they felt when they walked in to get their dress altered. And they said, you know what? I'm going to keep going back to Robert's shop because he makes me feel dignified. He respects me. I am going to be a loyal consumer. And as a result, he is going to be a success. And so it's something, Donnie, in this reciprocal nature of getting and giving, and recognizing that relationships are only as valuable as the shared interest and the shared return on the investment. And as Black people, I feel like we have done an amazing job recognizing the need to not only show up in recognition of our ancestors, because see, there's a lot tied to, even though my mama and daddy, and see, now I'm kind of shifting into how I would talk back home in Birmingham if I was sitting down with my girlfriend, Daji Hendricks, having a conversation. My mama and daddy, even though they didn't know anybody here, they would say to me, do not get up there and embarrass me. Your name is better than wealth. We taught you and we modeled what it meant to be an Anderson, what it meant to be a Williams. Don't you get up there acting like you ain't got good sense. And the use of ain't isn't because an understanding of the proper pronunciation or the proper tense that should be used. It's because when you are having familiar conversations, those are the words that are used to underscore meaning and to create shared understanding. So, I was real clear, Donnie. You going to Washington? That's great. We're going to lift you up in prayer, but don't you get up there and embarrass us. Recognize that you have been given a name. And when you introduce me as Tycely Williams, I'm sure many of your viewers recognized that I was named after Cicely Tyson. And so to this point about expectations, my parents had expectations early on that their first daughter would not only step into her own independent accomplishments, but that she would carry, and she would, with every introduction that I make, center the brilliance of Cicely Tyson.
Why didn't you run for president?
Donnie, you're trying to take me to the White House.
You've already been there.
Oh, Donnie, there are things that I appreciate about leadership: inspiring others, working towards common goals. I have not run for public office, largely because...
Breaking news on
breaking news. Breaking news. Largely, Donnie, because it's a lot of work.
You do a lot of work. You raised $100 million.
It's a lot of work. And
you build buildings.
buildings.
You bring people together. You convince people. I mean, I'm still trying to get a Pepsi ad. I'm going to have to take your fundraising course to figure out, do you teach fundraising courses?
Donnie, I teach at Penn State, and it is a joy to introduce the fundamentals of relationship building. But Donnie, I also do a lot of education around town at no cost. So I will be sure to keep you looped in to when I'm rolling out some tactics and some tips on how to raise money. But Donnie, it's super simple.
I mean, everybody here is excited about Wes Moore. They haven't met you.
Hey, Wes is amazing, as is the First Lady of Maryland. You have a wonderful dynamic duo in Dawn and Wes. And
Dawn Blythe Moore.
I am super, super excited to champion their success. But you know, Donnie, it takes a lot. We have to have an immense level of appreciation for people who are willing to serve.
Because it's bold. You're putting your whole life out there.
You're
It's
putting your
everything.
whole life out there. And the one piece that I will say, and I know Wes's story is similar to this, at this point, I have solved problems by raising dollars to advance federal policy so that Americans can live the most optimum life, right? That's the way I'm solving problems, by making sure that our policy directors here at the Bipartisan Policy Center, who understand that you've got to bring Republicans and Democrats to a table to talk through trade-offs, to identify bipartisan legislation, which is the only path forward. And so that's how I'm solving problems at this moment in my life. But Donnie, what I will say is I am hopeful that I am also speaking to my future self when I espouse what needs to happen and how success is obtained, because there are a lot of uncertainties around the path that I will take, around what's next. But what I am certain of is that no matter what I set out to do, or no matter what anyone else sets out to do, we can't do it without the support of others. And Donnie, that leads me to where I started this conversation, which is extending an extreme amount of gratitude to you. What I love about your book, Unapologetically Black, it reminds us of the need to not feel as if we have to code switch. If we want to say ain't, it doesn't necessarily mean that we do not have the intellectual abilities to conjugate. It means that is how I have spoken and where I feel most comfortable expressing a point. And what we have to do in this country is to create more pathways where expressions can exist without judgment. You know, I had a friend visit me a few weeks ago when she drove up to my house and she saw an American flag and she said to me, "I didn't know you were a Republican." And I said, "I'm not. What leads you to think I am?" And she said, "You have an American flag flying on the front of your house." You know, Donnie, to the
I'm
point that
insulted.
you,
I'm insulted because we fought in every war.
Yes.
We tipped the Revolutionary War.
Yes.
We tipped the Civil War. So that's a person that just doesn't know history.
Doesn't know history. And Donnie,
At least that
I want
part.
to end with this. I know we've talked a lot about what has influenced me. When I came to Washington, D.C., you know, I centered the name Irvin Reed. And there are so many people who are no longer with us. Kevin Jefferson would be one who played an instrumental role in my success. But I would not be who I am without a woman by the name of Angie Reese Hawkins. And Angie Reese Hawkins became the first Black woman to lead the YMCAs of Metropolitan Washington. So when I was introduced to Angie, she was leading over 17, 18 YMCAs in the DMV, District of Columbia, Southern Maryland, and in Virginia. What I loved about Angie, I met Angie through the strong, Black, brilliant husband that she has, Calvin Hawkins. That name may be familiar to people in Prince George's County. Calvin, because he felt as if he could trust me, said, "I ought to introduce you to my wife. She's leading the YMCA and she's always looking for good fundraising talent."
Wow.
So it is through this introduction that a brilliant Black man coordinated that I met Angie Reese Hawkins. And I worked for Angie for about 6 years when I was an independent consultant, had a small business. I told you how grateful I was for all that you've done to lift up the importance of small businesses. But Angie had an opportunity for me that she brought me in-house to the YMCA. And that was she was reopening the YMCA Anthony Bowen. And Donnie, I want to take a little moment to kind of share some insights on who Anthony Bowen was. I talked about one's name remains above the grave, that African proverb. This story is a wonderful illustration of that. So Anthony Bowen was actually born into slavery in Prince George's County in 1809. So I want you to just kind of set with that in a minute. Prince George's County, Maryland, 1809. Anthony Bowen is born into slavery. That's the only life he knows, is the life of a slave. He actually bought his freedom for $425 in 1830. Now, when you ask me, what do I think about Black men? He had to work. And let me tell you what he did. He moonlighted as a painter. He laid bricks. He later became a reverend. He did what he needed to do to make a way out of no way. And that is what Black men have done for so many times. He bought his freedom in 1830, and he actually became the first Black man, the first Black person to actually work at the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. He started the first YMCA for Black people in the world, and it started in 1853. Now, Donnie, slavery ended in 1865. 12 years before that, a man who was born a slave, who worked to make a way out of no way, opened the first YMCA for Black people in the world, right here in the District of Columbia. And it rests at 1325 W Street Northwest. It's in the U Street corridor, and it's about 4 blocks from its original site. Now, Donnie, I know we're nearing the end here, and I'm going to pause here.
We control this network.
We control this network. I love it. I love it. The original site of the YMCA Anthony Bowen was actually the 12th Street YMCA. Now, whether you were in Baltimore, whether you're in Atlanta, Georgia, whether you're in Birmingham, Columbia, South Carolina, there were these heritage YMCAs for Black families and Black people, because, Donnie, once upon a time, Black people and white people couldn't go to the same facility. If it weren't for people like my father, who were skipping out on their 8th grade science class to go down to Birmingham, Alabama, in the streets,
to protest,
dealing with all the nonsense, to fight for legislative change, we would still have this segregated system. So the 12th Street YMCA was actually historical for a lot of reasons. It actually housed Langston Hughes. Now, I know you know who Langston Hughes was, and I know that you know that he was actually a busboy at Wardman Park Hotel. So when you talk about the manifestation of Black men and the brilliance, he didn't just have the intellectual ability, he had a work ethic, right? So it housed Langston Hughes when he was here in Washington. It housed Supreme Court Justice Thurgood Marshall. And now I know you know the impact he had on Brown versus the Board of Education. And it was actually Dr. Charles Drew, who we also hold in high esteem. My nephew, Nathan, who I talk about, who wants to be an astrophysicist, knows who Dr. Charles Drew is and all that he did as a scientist. But that YMCA created a place where Black people, Black men, Black children, Black women felt a sense of safety and security. And when you can create a place where people feel safe, it fosters their innate abilities. And whether you're talking about one-on-one relationships, whether you're talking about corporate entities that are in communities, whether you're talking about not-for-profit organizations, HBCUs, we are all charged with creating spaces of safety. Because in those spaces of safety, the young people are growing. Our attorneys have the ability to fight injustices. Our artists have the inspiration to create art and poetry that brings much needed encouragement and lifts the strain from all that is heavy and hard in the world. And so, Donnie, I have enjoyed this conversation.
I got one more for you. Why don't we give back more? Deion Sanders goes out there. The man has health challenges, but he got out there for his HBC for Jackson.
Yes.
Ed Reed stepped up. He tried to do a similar thing. Robert Smith paid for a whole class of Morehouse seniors and their student loan bills. Oprah.
Yes.
I wasn't always an Oprah fan. I just want to state it for the record. But in retrospect, she helped Barack Obama get into position. She helped Wes Moore get into position.
That's right.
But I look at Baltimore, and I look at all of the basketball players, for instance, that have come out of my city, including the high school I graduated from. And then I look around the city, and I don't see any new recreation centers. Or I see a Jay-Z. Now, I love his music. I love the music. I love the music talking about the hustle. Can't knock the hustle. Selling cocaine. But I also live in a neighborhood where I see the damage, the havoc,
Yes.
the addiction, the drug addicts, the young people who figure there's no other way to make it out of here, but I'm going to be like Jigga. I'm going to be like Hove. But then we get to these platforms and to give back. I mean, we wouldn't be here. You know and I know. We wouldn't be here if it weren't for Harriet Tubman, who had her freedom, but she went back to get even the sorry man that she married. And then she did fall in love with a younger man named Davis along the way. And I was glad she was able to find her boo thing, because our people are just ungrateful. They asked the question, why should Harriet get the big piece of chicken? Why does Harriet get to sleep in the bed? We are some ungrateful people. How do we get more? And Martin Luther King said, the richer we become materially, the poorer we become morally and spiritually. We have learned to fly the air like birds and swim the seas like fish, but we've not learned the simple art of living together as brothers and sisters. And when we do give back, it's real smug. It's down our nose. You know how we are. We bring the rich man to the front row of the African Methodist Episcopal Church and sit them on the front. But dude with a little 6 o'clock shadow and some wine on his breath, we want to shun him. You know how we get in church. How do we heal a people? How do we get our people to give back? Philanthropy. How do we just get back to basics and stop killing each other? I know that's a lot to unpack, but I had to.
Donnie, it's a lot to unpack. And I appreciate the honesty that you've centered around what is unfolding in our community. I would encourage us, Donnie, to also give thought to the individuals who are exemplary that we can lift up and learn from, and to make sure that all of these individuals can create opportunities for young people to relate. You see, young people might not be able to relate to Oprah. Young people might not be able to relate to Robert Smith. So I don't want to take anything against the activation of their generosity, but I do want to go back to the point that we were talking about what influences our minds, whether it's the media, whether it's the social platforms that we rest in, we have to step into a place where this construct of goodness is tied to moving forward and joyfully giving back. We have to underscore expectations like the earlier successful Black entrepreneurs that we talk about. They didn't just drive for success for themselves, they brought their communities along with them. And Donnie, I also want to discount a lot of what rests around the misplaced narrative that Black people are not generous and philanthropic. So there's a brother, one of my favorite current social scientists by the name of Dr. Tyrone McKinley Freeman. His research really centers around Black philanthropy. And what we know, Donnie, is that Black families have contributed the largest proportion of our wealth to charity. The largest proportion of our wealth to charity since 2010 compared to white people and any other racial and cultural segmentation.
Get up.
Here's the deal, Donnie. We need more money to give. It's not that we're not giving. We actually give more of our dollar than anybody else gives. And you already know that we need to do more with our dollar than most people need to do. So the way we solve for this perceived generosity crisis in the Black community is to create pathways for Black people to have gainful employment, to create pathways for successful entrepreneurship, to create pathways for wealth generation, because we are already giving. It's just proportionately, we don't have as much to give. Now, here's the deal, and I'm going to close this out because I know you've got to ease on into your day. Annually, we study giving trends here in America. In 2021, there was $484 billion charitable dollars given. $484 billion. Now, here's the deal, Donnie. Of that, $15 billion was actually given by the most wealthiest Americans. And right now, there are just over 700 billionaires in America, many of which I am grateful give back. The challenge that we have, not only in the Black community, but across this country, is that we're squeezing out the middle class. The most generous people in this country are teachers, firemen, public servants, people who on average, no matter what corner of the country you're in, you're making less than $80,000. But proportionately, they're giving more to charitable organizations than people who are making six figures, than millionaires and billionaires. So Donnie, I'm just going to end with an invitation for everybody listening to this conversation to find a way to give back. We rest on a heritage with people who had to do a lot with the little. They had less education. They had less structured social capital. They had less life experience. And it seems as if when we look at what they've done, from being born into slavery, like Anthony Bowen, to finding their way to be a millionaire like Dr. A.G. Gaston, they found a way to not only do for them and theirs, they found a way to do for the community and to enlarge those who benefited from their brilliance. So I want to invite people, whether it's volunteering and giving your time, whether it's giving your testimony, having something positive to say about Donnie's book, Donnie's show, that is paying it forward. That is giving an endorsement. That is helping Donnie. or whether it's giving your treasure. And we have a lot of trust in our faith leaders. When you look at where a lot of our money goes, it goes to churches. There aren't any studies really looking at the impact of the dollars going into Black church. A lot of the statistics that we lift up are tied to what we can research, what we can make sense of. And there's a lot that happens as far as Black generosity is concerned. We have to sow into our own families, right? That within itself is an expression of kindness and goodness and generosity. And Donnie, I am proud to be amongst the people. When you look at who has proportionally given the most in America, I am proud to say that is Black people, and I am proud to be one among that number.
Okay, you got to leave us with a quote. One of your favorite quotes. I know you got one. You got something on the wall, Randy. Come on.
Donnie, there's so many favorite quotes. There's so many favorite quotes, but I never, ever miss the opportunity to center Marva Collins. This is something that I have repeated every morning after my morning devotions since I was a junior in high school.
Is that the Chicago educator?
Chicago educated, born in the great state of Alabama, doing some great things on the west side for public schools. Dr. Collins was amazing and awesome. But she said, I will ignore the tags and names given me by society, since only I know what I have the ability to become. I will continue to let society predict, but only I can determine what I can and cannot be.
Ladies and gentlemen, you've just heard from President Tycely Williams.
President of the Donnie Glover Fan Club. Yes! Thank you, my friend.
Good morning, world.